So, what is the military industrial complex, and how does it relate to protracted conflicts between the United States and what was once the Soviet Union, which is now known as Russia, the remnants of which are now known by and large because Russia is the largest nation? And the military industrial complex is basically a catch all umbrella term for how America has built up an industry around military and weapons supply. How this global industry has managed to pervade multiple aspects of not just our society and our culture, but other people's society and other people's cultures everywhere in the world, most nations in the industrialized world. The sale of armaments, whether we talk about guns, bullets, bulletproof vests, tanks, airplanes, aircraft carriers, missiles, nuclear weapons, is one of the biggest industries in the world. So it begs the question, raises the question, if two sides fight a bloody war, who benefits? Who benefits are the people who sold them the guns, the people who in effect funded the wars, the people who rebuild infrastructure in the countries and the regions that were damaged, the people who will rebuild the buildings, who will supply fiber optics, internet, and the people who can then manage the resources of whatever area was devastated. Those people benefit. Specifically, the military industrial complex is essentially what it sounds like. It's an industry built around military. The military industrial complex rose to prominence in the 70s and 80s during the peak of the Cold War, because the United States and Russia both made large investments in their military. There can be nothing more profitable than supplying a nation. I mean, you can imagine supplying an individual, a business, different levels of government, local, state, federal. But imagine supplying a nation. Now imagine supplying multiple nations. There have been different movies made about aspects of this. I think Lord of War with Nicolas Cage. There was another movie with Jonah Hill that touched on, being an arms dealer. So you have legal arms dealers and you have illegal arms dealers. Two of the biggest arms dealers in the world, legal arms dealers, are the United States and Israel. They produce, distribute, supply armaments for armies all around the world. Extremely profitable. When you look at somebody like Vice President Dick Cheney, he had a lot of ties to weapons companies. The Bush family had a lot of ties to weapons companies. This is a very profitable, very powerful industry that exerts a lot of control and influence over the government at a federal level because of lobbying, fundraising, etc., etc. Now, when we look at different levels of society, from the media, the news, the comic books our kids read, the video games our kids play, you see the effects of the military industrial complex. One of the most popular games is Call of Duty. You also have games like Halo, Battlefield. that literally entertain people of all ages, from children to adults, using like military concepts. They make war, they turned war into a game. And not just like a shooter game. They turned war, you know, war with like airplanes, helicopters, and I'm assuming different levels of battleships into a game for entertainment. This is how the military industrial complex pervades every level of society. If you look into comic books, a lot of the villains in comic books, a lot of the narrative, a lot of the heroes follow a Cold War narrative. Captain America, Iron Man. Iron Man is a weapons manufacturer. Stark Industries is a weapons manufacturer. If you watch the movies or if you read the comic books, Tony Stark literally makes weapons for the government. He's a hero. So the military industrial complex is this theory, is this ideology that there is an industry built around militarization of societies, of nations, where nations allocate a disproportionately large percentage of their budget to defense. And that defense is somewhat necessary because of realities like the Cold War. Because like the United States has to arm itself to protect itself against its potential enemies. Terrorism kind of tied into this. So, and it's very powerful to use fear as a marketing tool. So then you see presidents and presidential elections. One of the main issues presidents debate over is national security. Where you have some presidents who are very big on national security, even at sometimes the expense of liberties and individual liberties and freedoms. You have some presidents who, no president can be soft on national security, but you have some presidents that are a little bigger on individual liberties and freedoms. But national security is always one of the main topics that you'll hear discussed during any presidential election. Military-industrial complex. Also, how America has went from a nation in the early 1900s that was separatist, meaning it didn't get involved in other people's conflicts or politics, to a nation that was essentially like a police nation that would police the actions of other nations and help to ensure that freedom was maintained around the world. So this is just kind of an introduction into the military-industrial complex, how it pervades different levels of our society, from the things our children consume to the things we consume to the perceptions that we have, and how the reality of it is it comes down to what nations are willing to spend on national defense. And national defense is the purchase, acquisition, and funding of military programs and military equipment. These are multi-trillion-dollar budgets, multi-hundred-billion-dollar budgets that essentially every country has to buy weapons every year. Usually the national defense is usually the biggest line item on the budget. Everything else, social welfare, everything else, public health, which is part of social welfare, education, it takes a back seat to national defense, specifically in military industrialized nations. This can be very profitable and can help to stimulate the economy, because if you're a nation that produces weapons and there are a lot of wars going on everywhere, your country will by and large have a very robust GDP. But it begs the question, should we be spending more money on weapons or more money on educating future generations? More money on maintaining a high quality of life? Military industrial complex. War is good. for the people who sell the things needed for war. Short video. Just trying to provide different perspectives and information on things relevant to what's going on today. I don't say this often. Support what I'm doing. If you like what I'm doing, like it, share it, subscribe. Peace.